The recording will also be shared afterwards on our YouTube site. So if you do not want to be recorded, please refrain from participating in the discussion. We also ask you to use the chat to ask questions from presenters and to post comments. We'll have at the end, we'll have a short discussion. And the slides will be shared after the webinar, including links to the materials we're presenting today. And as I said, a recording will also be shared. I also want to mention that today is the International Migrants Day. And we also want to commemorate that because the topic of today very much also touches migrants through the framework of exploitation of migrant workers. All right, I think we can move ahead to the actual presentation. Thank you. So the agenda for today is first a brief introduction from our project team. And then we'll present the project outputs, especially the key findings from our report, and then we will present a concrete checklist. We'll also then hear some commentaries from our project partners and Nordic experts, and then we'll have a short Q&A at the very end. First, very briefly about the project. So this project, Integrative Approaches to Labour Exploitation and Work-Related Crime, is funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers. It's ending now at the end of this year. We started last year. HEUNI, that is the European Institute for Crime Prevention and Control, has been leading this project, but we have worked in close collaboration with our partners in Norway and Sweden, Lund University and Isabel Schultz, and then the team at Fafo in Norway, led by Synnøve Jansen. I would like our partners to just briefly say hello and introduce yourself if that's possible, if you are online. So first, Isabel, please.
Hello, everyone. As Natalia said, I'm Isabel Schultz. I'm Associate Professor in Sociology of Law at Lund University. I've been working on these issues with labor exploitation for some years now, together with Anina and Natalia and Synnøve, as you will meet soon. So I've been responsible for the collection of the data from the roundtables in Sweden.
We have the Norwegian team. Synnøve, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Synnøve Jansen, and I also have worked with this issue for over a decade now, and I have been responsible for the data collection in Norway and coordinating us internally. And I've also previously worked together with the HEUNI and the Lund at other research projects.
Thank you. Do we have any other members from the Norwegian team present?
No, unfortunately not today.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Thanks. So very briefly about this project. So this was a project where we wanted to look at the interlinkages between work-related crimes, labor exploitation, and work environment risks, and see how these intertwine, and whether we could, through combating breaches of work environments, also address labor exploitation. So this is what we will be talking about today as well. And to do this, we have tried to develop both knowledge to kind of create a report that will address these issues, but also then to create concrete tools that are actually useful for those practitioners who encounter potentially exploited workers in the workplace. And then finally, we also created short videos for practitioners where experts from all the Nordic countries talk about concrete good practices from their countries. And these will be shared towards the end of the webinar. Very briefly, first the report. So we have been working on a research report, which will be available at the end of the year. This report talks about the situation in the Nordic countries, and we also try to portray these interlinkages between occupational safety and health issues, work-related crime, and labor exploitation. We then also look at what are the challenges in the Nordic region in tackling labor exploitation, and then what are some of the good practices in terms of prevention, enforcement, and protection. The report also includes this fact sheet that I mentioned and a checklist, which we will present today. And we've done, as Isabel and Synnöve mentioned, several focus group discussions in all of the Nordic countries. We've also used information from other meetings, and then we've done some interviews. All right, well, firstly about the linkages. Now there's somebody who is not muted, so I think we will just try to mute you. Thank you. The linkages between occupational safety and health exploitation. This is something that we raised in the report, and we are saying that occupational safety and health overall, if there are breaches in this area, it might be an indication also of broader work-related problems and also of labor exploitation. We're also saying that occupational safety and health breaches can actually be part of a broader business model of exploitation. That is where an employer or a business intentionally breaches occupational and safety regulations as well as engages in exploitation. So we see that if there are occupational safety and health breaches, it can actually be a precursor to other violations. So that's why we, in our indicator list, which will be presented, we also see this as instances or pointers of work-related crimes and exploitative working conditions. However, the Nordic countries differ quite a lot in how they monitor and address these linkages. And of course, this depends on the national mandates and also on the capacities and roles of the oversight bodies. In the various Nordic countries, this oversight can be done by inspection authorities, such as the labor inspectorates, or by trade unions. In the study that we did, we see that inspectors, especially labor inspectors, the authority representatives, sometimes use these occupational safety and health provisions as a kind of an entry point to uncover also other signs of work-related crimes, especially of exploitation. And these could be, for instance, unsafe housing or excessive working hours. But we've seen that this approach alone is a bit insufficient to specifically address labor exploitation. If we then look at the key findings in terms of the challenges we've seen in the Nordic region, there are a variety of concepts to address labor market breaches and crimes. And these include questions such as social dumping and work-related crime, which originated in Norway, arbetslivskriminalitet. We also see a focus on economic crimes and also the framework of human trafficking. And depending on what framework is used at the national level, this of course then also affects the national policies and then subsequently also the national practices. And there are key differences in the Nordic countries. Then if we look at labor exploitation specifically, we see that this is also framed differently across the Nordic countries. And it also, of course, depends on the severity of the case, but sometimes also regardless of the severity, there might be a tendency to define this as labor law violations, as wage disputes, which is obviously a civil issue, or as criminal offences. We see this that these differences in how labor exploitation is framed leads to inconsistencies across the Nordic region, but it also then leads to inconsistencies at the national level. So there's not necessarily a uniform way to address labor exploitation even at the country level. And this then, we claim, also has limited effects on deterrence and prevention of these crimes. A key difference in the Nordic region is the differing mandates of labor inspection authorities. The Finnish and Norwegian labor inspectorates have the broadest mandate to monitor the terms of employment, including for migrant workers. In Norway, this mandate covers sectors with extended collective agreements. But if we look then at Sweden and Denmark, their counterparts lack this mandate, which limits their ability to detect exploitation beyond the kind of merely occupational safety and health issues. So in Sweden and Denmark, the labour inspectorates cannot oversee the terms of employment, as this is the remit of the social partners. So the social partners are really crucial in the Nordic labour model, and trade unions obviously then oversee the terms of employment, especially of their members. But challenges remain with regard to non-unionized migrant workers. Who is to oversee the terms of employment of migrant workers who are not unionized if the labour inspectors do not have a mandate to oversee their terms of employment? So this is a concern in some of the Nordic countries. We also see that there are challenges in actually mobilizing migrant workers. Of course, there are language barriers. There's also a fear among some of the workers, what happens if they unionize, and then overall the precarious employment conditions, and also kind of lack of awareness of trade unions overall. And there might also be a distrust of institutions which hinders workers from joining unions. We then have the Norwegian and Swedish multi-agency cooperation as examples of promising practices, but we have also included this among the challenges because there still remains some challenges in this work. So in Norway and Sweden, this work towards work-related crime is kind of combined under the framework of these A-krim, arbetslivskriminalitet centers, where a number of agencies at the national level cooperate to tackle work-related crime. So the authorities in these countries do joint inspections in workplaces, and they also share information. And for instance, in Sweden, the information sharing provision has been strengthened so that the authorities can actually share information quite easily nowadays. However, what we found in our study was that the focus still remains quite often on financial crimes against the state rather than on victim protection and wage recovery, and also on crimes against the state, for instance, in terms of workers working without necessary work permits. The focus may then be on, for instance, deporting those workers rather than exploring their working conditions. We also see that migrant workers face obstacles in claiming unpaid wages if they have been exploited. And this is, of course, a result of several problems. One is lack of information on behalf of the migrant workers themselves, where to seek help. There's also the problem with legal costs. Because most workers do not have access to, for instance, free legal aid, it might not be always covered for them. There's, of course, fear related to what happens if they start claiming their rights. And then there's also sometimes a lack of documentation, for instance, on the actual working hours. Then it becomes very difficult to claim unpaid wages. So we see that many remedies for workers exist in theory, but they may not be accessible in practice. And then we also see that labor exploitation is often hidden. Long supply chains, long subcontracting chains may hide the actual, like where the workers are, how to access them. We see bogus self-employment as a problem, and then also falsified contracts and other means making it difficult for authorities to detect this problem. If we then look at solutions, we're talking about labor inspection systems as one solution. We're suggesting to expand the role of labor inspectors and also social partners as one key solution. And we would in this respect especially want to highlight the Icelandic hybrid model, where the cooperation between the labor inspectorate, that is the authorities, and the social partners has been formalized by law. So there is a strengthened cooperation in terms of inspecting the terms of employment. We also talk in the report about improving communication with workers, for instance, using interpretation to actually being able to access workers and to talk to them. And also in this way detecting cases of labor exploitation and also facilitating enforcement. But of course, this again depends on resources. and also on coordination, and then also on risk-based targeting, how to use the resources that exist in the best possible way. We also raised the criminal law as a tool. In all of the Nordic countries, there are specific criminal provisions that are used to address labor exploitation. As examples, both Sweden and Denmark have criminalized the crime of human exploitation. In Finland, we currently have the crime of extortion at work discrimination, which is being used, which will be replaced by this usury in employment provision. In Norway, there's the wage theft provision. All of these exist, but we see that they are not really effectively implemented in each of the countries. So we are calling for better implementation of existing criminal provisions to ensure better enforcement. We also talk about raising awareness and strengthening migrant workers' access to reporting their experienced breaches and violations. So because we know the migrant workers remain vulnerable to labor exploitation, there's a need to strengthen reporting channels and also to provide workers with better information on their rights. One key issue we want to raise is the need for residence permit options that provide alternatives for exploited workers. So if an exploited worker actually reports their experiences, there's always the risk that they will then their work will be terminated and their work permit will also be terminated, leading into a need to leave the country. So we therefore call for residence permit options that reduce dependency on exploitative employers. And Finland has such an example with a residence permit option specifically targeted towards exploited workers. We then finally also raised the role of businesses and public procurement. So private sector entities obviously have a really important role in preventing and in addressing labor exploitation. And this can be done through including labor clauses in contracts and also through sector-specific initiatives. In the Nordic countries, we see several such initiatives, especially in the construction sector, where, for instance, labor market parties, employers, and also trade unions cooperate to address labor exploitation and to promote fair working conditions. We then have a list of a bit more detailed recommendations. I went through some of these already, but we first talk about the strengthening of institutional mandates and multi-agency cooperation. So as I mentioned, we are proposing that Nordic countries where the labour inspectorates have a more limited mandate, that the mandate should be strengthened to explicitly include the monitoring of employment terms for migrant workers. And also then to see that exploitation is actually an occupational safety and health issue as well. We also then encourage countries to improve existing multi-agency cooperation and to introduce, for instance, the ACRIM Centre model and also to strengthen that within the existing ACRIM centres by strengthening information sharing and then to ensure that there is a clear victim perspective, which we see is currently a bit lacking. We also encourage Nordic countries to adopt a risk-based approach for inspections and for prioritizing sectors and workplaces with kind of several indicators of vulnerability. And this is, of course, a concern because it would also require better information sharing so that this prioritization and kind of risk-based approach can actually be implemented. So this is something that the Nordic countries still need to work on. In terms of legal and also administrative tools, as I mentioned, countries have introduced a number of targeted criminalizations. This could still be, there could be more exchange between the Nordic countries to learn from one another about existing provisions in the other countries. But perhaps the most important and most pressing issue is to actually implement existing provisions and to apply this criminal justice perspective in those situations where it is actually a question of a crime and not of a civil offence. We also then talk about the need to strengthen sanctions for work-related crime, not only in the criminal justice realm, but also in the administrative sphere. And there's a clear need to introduce administrative sanctions for violations. And this is something which we've discussed extensively, for instance, in the Finnish context, that there is a need to introduce administrative sanctions that, for instance, labor inspectors could introduce in their inspections. As I mentioned, access to justice and remedies remains a concern. We need more concrete tools to ensure better reporting for exploited workers. This would include, for instance, anonymous channels for reporting and also multilingual support. It's often a question of not being able to talk in your own language. We also then, in the report, look at unpaid wages and wage claims. There are a number of ways of actually addressing unpaid wages, but it's very difficult for migrant workers to access. And one of the key recommendations is to ensure better enforcement of the existing EU sanctions directive in those countries in the Nordic region which are EU members, meaning that workers should get access to unpaid wages through the sanctions directive. We don't really see full implementation of that yet. And then, of course, for those persons whose exploitation fulfills the crime of human trafficking, there's a need to ensure that reflection periods are extended to these victims and to then apply or introduce resident permit options for exploited migrant workers. If we then look at empowering workers, one very concrete suggestion is to encourage workers to keep personal working hours records to support future wage claims, for instance. There are, of course, numerous electronic appliances to do these apps, but it can also be done simply on paper. It's also important that those who encounter workers during inspections actually engage with workers, even though the inspection technically is an inspection of the employer's actions. But of course, it's very important to also talk to the workers at the work site. There are various examples of using interpretation, either through telephone or through specific interpretation devices, which then translate to various languages. And it's also important to train inspectors and others who encounter workers in how to encounter workers, especially those who are in a vulnerable position, so as to actually being able to build trust with them. And then we also recommend Nordic trade unions to strengthen their engagement with migrant workers, in particular through outreach, through providing legal aid, and also to think about how to organize non-unionized migrant workers in the most efficient and comprehensive way as possible. And then if we look also at addressing structural and regulatory gaps, we see, as I mentioned before, that there's a bit of a concern or a kind of a question whether labor exploitation is a crime or a labor market issue, but we are saying that this should actually be seen as both, but it should not be seen as mere wage disputes. So there's a need to perhaps strengthen a bit of a criminal justice perspective also to work-related crimes and labor exploitation. We also want to strengthen this interlinkage between work environment risks and occupational safety and health questions, and to use breaches in that sector or in those questions also as an indicator for potential indications of labor exploitation. And then there's a need to look at how to dismantle and address labor exploitation in these difficult questions such as subcontracting and bogus self-employment, where we know that there exists exploitation, but it's difficult sometimes to detect. And there's of course also the big question of how is self-employment defined, especially in situations where it is a question of bogus self-employment. Should it actually be addressed as employment and not as self-employment? And then finally, we have this area of public procurement and business practices. So we are recommending Nordic public procurement bodies to use labor clauses in public procurement so that they can actually hold the suppliers accountable to ensure decent working conditions. We also talk about possibilities to limit supply chains complexities to improve oversight so that there's not very, very long supply chains, but there's a limit to those. And also that would enable a better oversight of those chains. And then we also encourage countries to strengthen cooperation between social partners, for instance, through joint initiatives or sectoral agreements. And then I want to give over to Annina, my colleague, to present our fact sheet and our checklist that was developed under this project.
Thanks, Natalia. So as part of this report, we've also developed a separate fact sheet and then a checklist for Nordic professionals to use. And these will be available in 6 languages, so in all the Nordic languages plus in English. And I'm presenting here the English version. So first, this fact sheet discusses like what are the key concepts used. So what is work-related crime and what is labor exploitation. And then we also briefly discuss what does labor exploitation look like and how do these exploitative business models that Natalia mentioned operate in practice. Then we discussed the main risks for migrant workers and this interconnection of exploitation to risks in the work environment. So obviously there are different risks in different sectors, but it's often that the migrant workers are the ones that are most vulnerable to exploitation and dangerous and poor working conditions, and they also typically have less control or ability to influence their working conditions than native workers, so to speak. We also cover briefly the Nordic approaches to tackle the risks, and then in the next section you can see then the actual fact sheet. Yes, this fact sheet is based also on our previous work in developing a kind of checklist targeting different actors that do inspections, so authorities, but also social partners and other relevant actors. And the idea is that via these inspections and looking at the bigger picture, looking at different aspects of breaches of work environment, working hours, and so on, you can identify cases that could potentially be also cases of labor exploitation. And obviously different authorities and actors have different mandates and they look at different issues. But it's important that to say that recognizing these risks and patterns of exploitation by combining the different observations is key to strengthen detection of this phenomenon. And then we try to make this checklist comprehensive, given that, as we explained, different Nordic labor inspection authorities and other authorities have different mandates in place. If we then go to the actual points in the checklist. So the idea is that this has been developed to better identify occupational safety and health breaches that may be linked to work-related crime and labour exploitation. So we go through actually 7 different areas where there is possibility to identify and detect breaches. So in the first area that we cover, it's breaches concerning workplace inductions. So not informing or training the workers about occupational safety and health requirements, and not giving them, for example, instructions on how to use personal protective equipment or the use of various machinery or chemicals. The second area looks at breaches concerning working hours. So there are points that beyond just having overly long working hours, whether there's no access to legally required breaks or daily or weekly rest period, if there's no reliable system for recording the actual working hours, or if there are these kind of lack of days off or lack of holidays, for example, or indicators of manipulation or falsification of working hours records. So actually the migrant workers are doing a lot longer days at the work site than what looks according to the schedule of working hours list. Then there are breaches concerning work clothing and gear, so obviously not providing sufficient and safe gear, for example, winter clothes, or that there is an absence of or improper use of personal protective devices. The fourth area covers breaches concerning employment responsibilities. So obviously, if there's a lack of mandatory health insurance for the workers, the employer denying access to health care, or these things where employers might return workers to their countries of origin immediately after workplace accidents. And then in the fifth area, there are breaches concerning safety measures. So obviously everything from unsafe work equipment and lack of maintenance to unsafe scaffolding, ladders, slippery floors. The fact that there is no system for reporting safety concerns or incidents in the first place, or that reporting such incidents would result in retaliation against workers who report them, or that safety violations are not investigated or addressed in any way. As an example, we have this quote from a Finnish NGO representative that they've seen a number of migrant asbestos removers who have worked completely without any mask or protective equipment. Then in the sixth area, there are breaches concerning employer-provided accommodation. If there are signs of living in the place of work, or there's poor or crowded accommodation organized by the employer, we realize that the different authorities in the different Nordic countries have different mandates, and that might not cover accommodation. But there are also indicators that are relevant when there is a possibility to look at also the accommodation provided by the employer for their workers, for example, in seasonal agricultural work. Then this final area is breaches concerning psychosocial stress. So In the list, there are many indicators that relate to signs of exhaustion or anxiety and fearfulness, expressions of this kind of lack of control, of statements indicating that the workers cannot leave the job or improve their situations. And also, obviously, there could be some signs of coercion or dependency, such as mentioning debts that people have paid for the job, or that their documents are being withheld, or maybe they have been threatened by their employer if they complain that they would be deported from the country or lose the job. So obviously, these features and observations themselves do not necessarily point to labor exploitation as standalone indicators, but they do showcase that in various occupational safety and health breaches that involve migrant workers in risk sectors, really they merit also further attention to this issue of broader work-related crimes and exploitative labor conditions, and in certain cases also including human trafficking for the purpose of forced labor. Then we are trying to move to the next slide. So yes, as a request from some of our Nordic stakeholders, we also added some additional indicators of labor exploitation into this checklist, which can be also considered, and are then kind of signs already perhaps of more severe cases of labor exploitation, when, for example, the workers' identity documents are confiscated by their employer, or that they report being deceived or threatened by their employer, and that the employer answers all questions on behalf of the workers, not allowing them to speak at all. But the next section then looks at what should be done if you encounter and detect these signs of safety and health violations or indicators of labor exploitation. And these points obviously start with providing the workers with information, with contact details, so that they can really think about their situation and what would be wise for them to do. Sometimes it takes a trust for them to disclose their experiences, so they need information so that they can make informed decisions. And then one key point is obviously that if there would be indicators of human trafficking, then with the permission of the workers, they should be referred to specialized support. And that also includes issues like reflection periods, for example, that potential victims of trafficking are entitled to. We also make the point that it should be ensured that migrant workers who are working without a work permit are not to be just deported before it has been confirmed that they are not victims of human trafficking or subjected to labor exploitation, because such victims might have right to reflection periods or other resident permit options, or to compensation, including this payment of unpaid wages following the employer sanction directive. Obviously, there should, if it's possible, inspectors should take pictures and videos and record these breaches, and then following their own procedures, report them to the other authorities, to the police, or to give this kind of tip-offs to other authorities such as tax and health and safety authorities. And then when it's possible and within the mandate of the inspection body, they should also impose sanctions on employers that commit these offences or violations, which can include issuing corrective measures, giving fines, or starting other procedures following national legislation and their organization's own guidelines. Then we have one more area, which is just some tips for encountering migrant workers who may have experienced exploitation. So adopting a victim-centered approach, treating the workers with respect, and observing, listening, and giving them time is very important, because for many reasons it is very difficult for exploited workers to talk about their experiences. So it is advisable to try to establish good rapport and to explain what you are doing and how is the information that they are giving, how it is being used, and what are the possible follow-up actions. Then we have recommended reading. So for each Nordic country, there will be a bit different depending on what kind of materials are available. And then also we are going to provide key national contact details to certain key authorities, to human trafficking support, and to like key national NGOs and trade unions, for example. So these are going to be available in all of the Nordic countries, and really we hope that these will be very useful for anyone who is doing inspections, and to pay more attention to these kind of issues relating to occupational health and safety, work environment risks, and their interconnection to also issues of labor exploitation.
Thank you, Annina. Just to confirm about the checklist, it will be launched in English and Finnish today, and the other Nordic languages will follow as soon as we get them from the interpretation office. We are also today launching a set of videos. Within the framework of this project, we have asked experts from each of the Nordic countries to talk very briefly, it's 2-3 minutes each, about a good practice from their own country. I want to personally thank all of our Nordic experts who agreed to join us in creating these videos. These are available on HEUNI's YouTube website. We have good practices from Denmark with Mathilde and Thomas from the Center for Against Human Trafficking in Denmark. And we then have Alexandra from Norway talking about good practices in preventing work-related crime. We have Saga from the trade union in Iceland talking about the role of trade unions in preventing work-related exploitation. We then have Sara from the city of Malmö talking about the Swedish ACRIM cooperation against labor exploitation and work-related crime. And then we have Katja, Pia and Nina from the Labor Inspectorate in Finland talking about how to build trust when meeting workers at work sites, and also good practices during inspection visits. But these will all be available on our YouTube channel. And then we have reserved some time for commentaries from our Nordic partners. We will start off with some reflections from our project partners, Isabel Schulz and Synnöve Jansen from Lund University and Fafo respectively. And then we will follow with a commentary from Saga Kjartansdottir from the Icelandic Confederation of Labour, then from Mathilde Skov Dahlström from the Danish Center Against Human Trafficking, and then Katja Pienieno from the Division of Occupational Safety and Health in Finland. But we will start with, I see, Synnöve and Isabel. Who wants to start? Isabel.
I can go first, if that's okay. Okay, thank you very much for the presentation and for summarizing the results and the report and everything else. I want to say something from the Swedish perspective. It's already been reflected very well in what you presented, but as many of you are quite aware, especially the Swedish participants here, Sweden had for a long time struggled to find its path to address labor exploitation. And now, since we adopted the concept of arbetslivskriminalitet, or work-related crime, that we adopted from Norway, which also includes this multi-agency cooperation, the so-called ACRIM centers, there's a much more positive tone among the practitioners and experts we meet, that it's at least Sweden have something to work with, like we have an idea of where we're going. But so even though this seemed to be promising and also unifying, I think there's a unifying in this concept and the approach as well. During both the focus groups and the roundtable discussions that we had during the fall, and then also, yeah, I think it was the fall, or was it the spring? Yeah, and the roundtable discussion last week, several problems are still raised. And given that I've been looking at these issues now for, not really a decade, but quite a long time at least, many of the things that been mentioned before as problems or issues seem to still be issues, even though we have this model and approach now to work on. And in particular, it is the access to justice for exploited migrant workers. And you have already, Natalia and Anina, mentioned this, but I think one of the issues that was discussed during the roundtable discussion in Sweden last week is the mandate and capacity of the labor inspectorates. While, as you presented, the Finnish and Norwegian labor inspectors have broader powers to monitor wages and terms of employment, Sweden does not. Neither do Denmark, but I'll focus on Sweden here. And we, on the other hand, have a strong three-part agreement in the what we call the Swedish model, based on negotiations of collective agreement between the union and employers. But since you're all aware, trade unions mainly work with their members, and ununionized migrant workers risk falling outside the scope of the oversight of the trade unions. So this seemed to still be an issue. And at the same time, we've seen, and I've also studied some initiatives from trade unions and promising examples of trade union taking a very active role today with providing advice and guidance for non-unionized workers, or those who can become members, even if they were not members before the issue was raised or they were exploited. And initiatives here where trade unions have been very good at negotiating salaries and also taking employers to the labor court in Sweden. So we have some good examples, but still, for those who do not get help from the union, access to justice remains very, very limited, even if there are some other more legal ways of getting salaries for exploited migrant workers. And then when it comes to the criminal law as a mechanism for access to justice, we have noted in several studies that, as you have also been part of the Finnish and Norwegian team, that the criminal process in Sweden, like the reported crimes when it comes to human exploitation and human trafficking for forced labor, very few cases that are reported result in prosecution, and even fewer to convictions. And if we compare in the study, we've compared Norway and Finland. Sweden seemed to have a even thinner line here when it comes to convicting people or prosecuting people for human trafficking for forced labor. So And also, actually, I could also mention when we discussed this in the roundtable last week, I thought that was interesting. It's not necessarily more criminalization that the experts that we talked about who work on these issues on a daily basis that they ask for. For example, we discussed this wage theft legislation in Norway. Instead, they are more looking for solutions where the legislation we do have on human exploitation and human trafficking for forced labor is used more efficiently. And we are not there today. So I think there's still a lot to be done here in Sweden. So I think I'll round up my commentary with that. So yeah, I'll leave the word to you, Synnøve.
Thank you very much, Isabel. And I think you summarized some of the points that I was also going to touch upon. Very briefly, as mentioned, the discourse on work-related crime sort of comes from Norway. And then in that sense, on the surface at least, Norway has a very strong and coordinated model, and work-related crime discourse is one part of that. A different part of that is prior to this discourse, we also had a strong emphasis on social dumping. So it's important to see these two policy fields together, and that this runs parallel then to increased mandate and control powers of the administrative resources, and but also then the policing of labor market relations. So that's sort of the larger picture where there is a, you could say that has been a successful merging of these two policy fields, where and an increased focus then on exploitation. And this has resulted in sort of these co-located work-related crime centers, but also a methodology for doing joint controls with the central actors. But however, as in other countries, we struggle with gaps in enforcement, where particularly then breaches of the penal law is a challenge, and there is also challenges in relation to legal aid for wage claims. And similar to Sweden, cases that are reported as human trafficking are seldom prosecuted, and the same can also be said for the wage theft legislation. So I think while there is sort of the larger picture where there's been much development, if you see it over time in the past years, there is still road ahead, and it's but this is high on the political agenda. So in that sense, there it looks promising. But as from a legal access to justice perspective, it's the same as in Sweden. A lot of migrants struggle to find remedies for wage theft, and to access then legal aid, because when the cases for wage theft are not prosecuted, the routes for legal aid is limited, also because of procedural risks. So basically, it's very expensive to take these cases to court, and the migrants have a lot of individual responsibility then to document their working hours and to press charges themselves. And I think I'll leave it with that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Isabel and Synnøve, really important points. We still have 3 invited commentaries before we open up for discussion. I would first like to call Saga Kjaftasdottir, expert on labour market issues at the Icelandic Confederation of Labour, to briefly reflect on the Icelandic hybrid model, which has been in effect now for almost a full year. How does it work in practice, and what does it look like from an Icelandic perspective? So,
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you to the previous speakers. So my name is Saga. I work for the Icelandic Trade Union Movement, the Federation of Labour in Iceland. Just to set the background very quickly, we in Iceland have very high membership, union membership, also among migrant workers. We have the mandate to go into workplaces in what we call our labor rights inspections to make sure that collective agreements are upheld. So that is our responsibility and our role. And then the Occupational Safety and Health Authority has, of course, overseeing occupational safety and health, but also working conditions for sort of limited groups of workers, posted workers, temporary staffing agencies. And we collaborate quite a lot and have throughout the years. However, as Natalia mentioned, since the start of this year, this collaboration between the social partners and the institutions was formalized with a law, and it's done, you could split it into two. So first there is a kind of a high-level committee with 4 government ministers, the social partners and institutions, that is to meet at least once a year with the ministers for consultation and a dialogue about labor market crime. The first task of this committee was to draft an action plan against labor market crime, which is now pretty much ready, although it hasn't been presented. I will not go into the content of it, that's for another presentation later. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that there is also part of this formalized collaboration between us, the social partners and the institutions, is a platform with regular meetings. And so this year we have been meeting every 2 weeks for the most part. It is us, the trade union representatives, the employers, and the Occupational Safety and Health Authority in Iceland. How is it going? I mean, I would say it's a work in progress for sure. I think partly it's about personal relationships and building trust, like most things in life are. So that is what we have been doing, I would say. We are sharing, using these meetings to share information and tips, but historically and it has mostly been tips from us to them or to the institutions. So we are working on, well, what my goal is, I would say, for the months following, well, after New Year, is to increase the exchange of information in both directions. It is complicated, as you can imagine, even though the law states that the institutions can share information with us when it's relating labor market crime. There are conflicting laws about institutions that, are obstacles to this. So it remains in some part to be solved. However, we have received some tips from the institutions where they suspect, potential labor exploitation. I think this checklist and report speaks very directly into kind of the dialogue that we've been having with the Occupational Safety and Health Authority, because I think there is potential for them being more open to labor exploitation and sending us tips about it. I think there's also an opportunity for more joint inspections, because as we know, labor inspection is labor intensive. It takes a lot of time and work. So I believe that there's a lot of opportunity in more joint inspections of us at the institution. I think I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saga. This was very, very interesting. Without further ado, I want to give the floor to Matilda Skov-Dahlström at the Danish Center Against Human Trafficking, who's an expert there, to talk a bit about recent developments in Denmark to counter work-related crime and labor exploitation specifically. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Natalia, and your colleagues for including us in this study, and also for presenting today this comprehensive work that you've done, the checklist and the recommendations. It's very interesting to follow. Well, from the Danish side, I can say that some of the newest information that we can bring to the table today is that the Parliament has just last week, I think it was, adopted a multi-annual police agreement, which sets out the financial and strategic objectives for the police from 2026 to 2030. And in this agreement, it is stated that more resources will be allocated for the police, including a number of extra staff, between 15 and 30 employees, as mentioned in the agreement, to work on in the area of work crime and also organized crime in general. And it's stated that it's an ambition to strengthen the efforts, and also the multi-agency efforts in relation to work crime, specifically by making a new fora for work crime that will be based in South Jutland Police District. And that's the police district that is already responsible for the coordination of the efforts on human trafficking and human smuggling within the police. They're already also part of multi-agency operational collaboration together with the labor inspection and also the tax department, in the model that's inspired somewhat, I think, by the A-Krim approach. In the Danish context, it's called Indsatsteam. We don't know much about the practicalities yet and the mandates that the police will have in this area because it's quite new, as mentioned. But the forum will also include the social partners, so meaning the unions and the employer organizations, and they will also have to work together with other authorities and agencies in their work. And also just to mention that this initiative also builds upon a range of other initiatives in this area over the past years. For instance, a mandate for the Working Environment Authority in Denmark to inspect employer-provided private housing. And we, from the Danish Center Against Human Trafficking, have actually ourselves participated for the first time this week in one of those joint inspections in a private housing. And it will be very interesting to see what this new provision will lead to in terms of identified victims or cases against employers once it has been implemented. It's also a very new provision. There are also several other initiatives, political initiatives, such as a contract freeze legislation, and there has to be implemented identification card for workers on large construction sites. So there's definitely an attention to this area in the Danish context. We also have a new action plan on human trafficking coming up. The current one is expiring at the end of this year. But the last dot has not been made, so we can't really present today the actual initiatives in the action plan, but we can say from our own side within the Danish Center Against Human Trafficking that we have recently published a national referral mechanism on our website. And we intend to elaborate on that over the coming years, making the referral mechanism even more operational, and also giving attention to multi-agency cooperation in the area of work crime and exploitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matilda. Very interesting to hear about the recent developments, looking very good in Denmark as well. Thank you so much. And then finally, we have Katja-Pia Jeno, a senior officer at the Division of Occupational Safety and Health here in Finland. Please, Katja-Pia.
Thank you. Just a few short points.
When we talk about labor exploitation, obviously the unpaid salaries are very important. But in my opinion, labor exploitation, it can manifest itself in many ways. And this checklist that Annina presented, it's excellent and very practical. And it helps us to see the connection between labor exploitation and problems in the work environment, because they are connected. And I think the problem is that often these problems in work environment are dealt with a narrow vision during inspections. For example, if we see workers without proper protective equipment, or if we encounter a company that doesn't have any records of working hours, we only give instructions to the employer about these matters. And we don't stop and think if there's maybe something else behind these breaches. So in my opinion, I think one of the key elements to sort of interlink the labor exploitation and work environment breaches is to widen our mindset as inspectors and look at the situation as a whole, that what is behind these individual breaches that we come across. That's my short commentary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katja-Pia. And we really, of course, hope that this checklist will be used as a tool by inspectors and social partners and others who come across workers, and to kind of broaden this perspective from merely looking at kind of signs of exploitation to look at overall breaches in occupational safety and health. We now have some time for a discussion. We kindly ask people to note their comments in the chat function. If you have any questions to us or to the speakers or to someone else perhaps, and then we can take those here. We're having some problems with our connection, so apologies for the slides disappearing every now and then. There's a bit of a problem with the cord, I believe. There are already some comments in the chat on well, thinking about raising the connection between occupational health and safety and also labor exploitation. We also included some of our other tools. There's a previous study we did on remedies to migrant workers in the Nordic region, which is available in the chat, and also this handbook that we did at the request of the Swedish Gender Equality Agency on labor exploitation in the Swedish context, so that's also available. There's one comment about what labor inspectors in different countries can actually do to address issues. In Finland, basically, we have this written advice as the only kind of tool. And this is why we, in our recommendations, raised the need for administrative sanctions as a mechanism of giving a slightly more kind of stronger tools to use by labor inspectors and other inspection authorities. So if there's anybody in the audience who has any experiences on, well, mindless, not only, yes, if there's any experiences from other countries, that would be very interesting to hear. So please, the floor is open. If there's somebody who doesn't want to write, we can also take some comments in person if you want to open the microphone. If there's anybody, let me see if I can see. Nobody has raised their hand.
Yeah, if you have any questions or comments, please raise your hand and we will give you the floor.
There's one comment in the chat now saying, what would be your first recommendation to private sector employers who have policies against exploitation but are hesitant about how to put them into practice? Should I answer?
I think you are better.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Well, thanks so much. We have at HEUNI been working with the private sector now for, I would say, some 10 years. And we've developed a lot of guidelines for companies. I think well, a lot of private sector companies, and this is something we also looked at in this remedy report, which Annina linked in the chat. There are some very overarching, general strategic tools in many companies to address sustainability and also in some cases, some rare cases, also labor exploitation. But what we're saying is that there's a need to actually make those part of the everyday work of the organization. I think it's important if a company has a genuine and serious intention to address labor exploitation specifically, then those policies have to become part of the everyday practices of the company. So it means vetting your partners, ensuring that if you have suppliers or subcontractors, you include these in your contractual elements, and you also oversee those contracts. So I think it's perhaps just implement what you have and don't be afraid. I don't know if this answers the question. There's also, thank you, a follow-up question about sector-wide cooperation. Do we have any cases where sector-wide cooperation has already been tried? What do you want to mention?
Yes, so we've identified some of these sector-wide good practices, especially from the construction sector. So there are these initiatives where, for example, the employers union and the trade union in the construction sector work together to counteract labor exploitation and abuse by, for example, also doing these kind of joint efforts and inspections and sharing information and all that. And we also have some interesting examples from Sweden and Norway, which have been focusing on collecting more information about work-related crime and facilitating this kind of sectoral movement towards better tackling this phenomenon. So there are some examples in the report. And then for Finland, we've also recently developed this kind of tool for public procurement in the cleaning sector that utilize this kind of cooperative joint learning from people that procure cleaning services and how they could in their own work then better put clauses in contracts, but also to do concrete audits and, for example, interview workers in certain circumstances to ensure that the contracts and collective agreements are maintained according to legislation. But I think this is an area where we need there's a lot of potential for cooperation in the future.
Thanks, Annina. We then have a question on whether there's any evidence or statistics on the effect of the ACRIM model on identifying victims of labor exploitation. I don't think we have comparable statistics from the countries that have actually implemented the ACRIM model. And as both Isabel and Synnöve, yes, I think Synnöve wants to mention, as you both mentioned, it's actually not been very strong on identifying victims per se, but Synnöve, maybe you want to respond to this.
I can just quickly comment that the ACRIM teams in Norway don't have prosecutorial power, so this is they're not actually built necessarily to investigate, to do police investigation as such. The cases then have to be referred to the police district, usually for the larger cases. So in that sense, perhaps that's an answer also in terms of whether these centers are meant to identify victims and prosecute. So for now, we don't have a specific data on this, but I think it's a good question to be taken into account in future projects, perhaps.
Natalia, you're muted. If you try,
Are we now muted? Yeah, no. Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, we're having some slight technical challenges. Yes, there's a question about whether occupational safety and health inspectors and probably labor inspectors overall in the Nordic countries distribute leaflets from trade unions when they're out on inspections. Kati-Pia, would you like to respond in terms of the Finnish context? Oh yes, there's already a commentary in the chat, but maybe you want to say this also by using the microphones, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, because in Finland we have two types of collective agreements. If they are universally binding, all the employers have to follow the collective agreement, and we often give out salary charts for those collective agreements to the employees, employers sometimes as well, yes. Some trade unions have produced these summaries of the whole collective agreement, and we have given those out as well. But I have to say that sometimes there has been some discussion here that whether we are allowed to give out sort of material written just by the trade union and not from, both. Well, the collective agreements, they are always done by both parties, but if the printout is by the trade union, so like, is it biased or not? So these kind of discussions have been here, but at least for myself, I have given out these salary charts and also the sort of summaries of collective agreements.
Thank you, Katja-Pia, really good. Do we have any other labor inspector from any of the other Nordic countries who would like to comment on this? Whether this is a practice also in the other Nordic countries that, for instance, salary charts or other documentation from the social partners is. Yes, please, Natasha.
Hello, I am not an inspector. Just making sure. I work for the labor inspection in Norway as a consultant. And I also speak Polish, so I work with the migrant workers. A lot of them are from Poland. But I see on this matter as this is a very important matter. The minimum wage that is mandatory is only regarding 9 sectors. All of the other jobs are non-binded by any minimum wage, so we see a lot of problems there. But also those who have minimum wage struggle to find information about it in their language that they understand. We do not translate this information to other languages because it changes every other year, so it changes too quickly to keep up with our webpage. So we have it in Norwegian, but there is definitely a need for this information in other languages if it's supposed to reach the people that need to know this information. So we produce this information locally in centers for migrant workers, as we call them, where the labor inspection is one of the authorities that comes into this partnership that has the goal to provide the migrant workers with the best information possible. But there are a lot of challenges with reaching the migrant workers with the information, even about that there is a center where they can get the information that they need. So there's a lot to be done, and I thank you for this report. It's very important for us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Really interesting information. And then I also see that Dorte from the Danish Labour Occupational Safety and Health Authority would like to comment on the Danish situation. Please, Dorte, you have the floor.
Thank you. My camera doesn't work right now, so you have to look at the old photo. Anyway, the Danish inspectors do not carry material from the social partners with them on inspections. We have, maybe the camera will work now, maybe. Anyway, maybe, no, we have information of the most common collective agreements on our website, workingdenmark.dk, which is our kind of posting website, where the social partners give us information about the newest collective agreement. And as in Norway, they are in Danish because they are changed ever so often, and it's just too much work to have them translated. But it is an issue that we only have the information in our own local language and not something accessible for either employees or employers from abroad. But it's mainly up to the social partners what to have on that part of our website. So yeah, we don't hand out material from social partners when on inspection.
Thank you so much, Dorte. Very interesting and important information. There's a comment now in the chat or a question on whether anybody has used AI translation tools for this kind of information. Because this obviously, I mean, because as you all mentioned, the information changes constantly, so there's a need for kind of a quick way of translating. So has anybody used any tools like this? We yesterday, as I mentioned briefly in previously, that at least in Finland this is not for translation, it's for interpretation, that there is this kind of a interpretation device that can be used on inspections, which then has a certain language kind of selection, and which is then of course then kind of, well, the data protection issues have been covered. So that's something that can be used on site, but then for translation, at least our experiences of using AI translation for documentation has so far not been.
No, it's not 100%, but I think it's developing quite rapidly. So I'm thinking that in the future, certainly this kind of information then could be at least provided using an AI-based translation, saying it in the front, but just to allow migrant workers that are not knowledgeable in the language of the country of destination to be able to at least focus on certain key points and elements in the collective agreements.
Thanks, Albina. And then Natasha here mentions that there's a chatbot that uses AI in Norway in various languages. Do we have any additional questions or comments? See any in the chat? No raised hands. Oh yes, now there's a few. I'll take the chat first and then the hand. It's the moment. So there's a question: how do trade unions feel about this AI translation? Because the texts are obviously the result of very careful and sometimes complex and detailed negotiations. So what do you feel? How do you feel about this? Is there anybody who wants to comment on that? Maybe in the meanwhile, we can take the comment by Maria. So please, if you introduce yourself as well.
Thank you. I was going to write it in the chat, but now I can say it. My question concerned this beställaransvarslagen, which we have in Finland. Did you at all take this legislation in consideration in this study? Thank you.
Thank you. You look at this, what's it called, the
Contractors
Liability Act. Not really, because this project was very focused on occupational safety and health and the kind of role on inspections and how to look at kind of the mandates and the roles of those who oversee the working conditions. We are mentioning it, but it's not really the focus of this study, unfortunately, no. And nobody has answered. Katja-Pia, yes, please.
Just a comment on this Contractors Liability Act. In my opinion, it's more a tool against grey economy, not so much against labor exploitation. I think sometimes it's even unfortunate that some companies, when there are problems in the subcontracting chain, they say that no, we are fine because, you know, we check the Contractors Liability Act documents and everything was in order. So sometimes it can even somehow blindside companies into thinking that everything is okay just because the subcontracting company produces some documents which are not even related to any like salary payments and so on. So, you know, I have mixed feelings about this tool as far as labor exploitation is concerned.
Well, thank you, Katja-Pia. Very useful and important. And then there's a comment in the chat about the problems with AI translation tools. They can be useful, but of course, well, at the moment, as we've noticed ourselves, they kind of provide not fully comprehensive translations. All right. I think maybe unless there's any pressing comment or question, or now there's a comment about the right to secure evidence. Yes, and thank you also for the thanks regarding the report. Yes, talking to workers is key. And that's also one of the, as we mentioned, one of the key findings that even though the inspections focus on the actions and the responsibilities of the employers, it's important to talk to the workers to actually understand what's going on in the workplace. And their interpretation and various tools and checklists are, of course, really useful and important. I think we will conclude here because we have 2 minutes left. I want to thank all. Saga wants to say something, please. Quickly, we have 2 minutes. Saga, please.
Excuse me, it was actually an accident. I was looking for another button. But thank you very much for this event. It's been very useful.
Well, thank you, Saga, and thanks for the accidental remark. Thank you so much. We want to thank all those who participated in our project partners, the donor, the Nordic Council of Ministers. And also I forgot at the beginning to extend the thanks to our focus group participants, our roundtable participants, and the reference group participants. We've had representatives from all of the Nordic countries in a project reference group. So thank you to everyone, and thanks also everyone who joined this webinar today and for your very active engagement, discussion and comments. And yes, Merry Christmas to all of you and all the best for 2026. Thank you so much.
And the webinar is being recorded and we will release it on HEUNI's YouTube channel, and we will also share with you the links to the videos that we produced, the English and Finnish version of the checklist, and are really hoping that in the beginning of next year you will also take a look at the brand new report that has a lot of information on this topic. Thanks so much and happy holidays.